Hi, welcome to Dreamsical Designs by Danielle. In this video, I show you how to draft your very own short teddy coat. This includes a notch collar with 2 lapels, outer coat pockets, coat body, facing, lining, and the inner welt pockets. Instead of starting the pattern making process from scratch, I give you the skills to create your own designs by transforming a single pattern, your basic blocks, the foundation to all your designs. So we start with your basic bodice blocks, and I show you how to transform them into your short teddy coat design. And if you don't have basic bodice blocks, I've got you covered. Watch my other video on how to draft those. Once you finish drafting your short teddy coat design, head on over to my other video where I show you how to sew them together. Let's get started. These are the tools that you will need for the pattern making process. Large tracing paper, I'm using grid pattern paper for sewing. Regular large sheets of paper, I'm using poster board that is 22 inches by 28 inches. A large rectangular ruler, mine is 24 inches by 6 inches. A flexible ruler. A tape measure, mine has both inches and centimeters on it. A hip curve ruler. A French curve ruler. A pencil and eraser. There are 12 pattern pieces in total. It seems like a lot, but only the lapel and collar are a new skill to learn. All other pattern pieces come together easily from transforming your basic blocks. And the last 3 pieces are just different size rectangles. Start with your front basic bodice block, non-stretch edition. If you don't have one, watch my tutorial video linked in the description. Place your tracing paper over your front basic bodice block and copy the pattern over, including the location of the waist and chest lines, center front, armhole notch, seam allowances, and hem. You do not need to copy over the darts as we won't need them for the coat. Before we draft the lapel, we need to make some modifications to the bodice. Determine your desired coat length. I put mine at my upper hip, roughly where my pelvic bone is. Mark this location. Measure 1 inch below this mark, and this will be the new hemline. This extra 1 inch will fold under to the inside of the jacket, making sure that your lining doesn't show on the outside. Extend the armhole by 1 inch outwards from the base. Then, draw a vertical line from the new armhole base to the hemline. You may need to extend the width of the hemline if needed. You should not shorten the hemline width. Extend the center line by 2 inch inwards. Then, connect the new center line to the neckline and hem with a horizontal line. Now we can start working on the lapel design. Use your ruler to mark a point that temporarily extends the shoulder line by 1 inch towards your neck. This represents the collar stand. Starting from the break point, which we will locate at the point where the waistline intersects with the new center line, draw a line that extends to the end of the collar stand. This line is called the roll line. Take your tracing paper and fold it back along the roll line. Redraw the neckline on the back side of your paper, marking the location of the center front. Following the curve of the trace neckline, extend that curve from the center front at an angle of 25 degrees with a length of 2.5 inches. Then, draw a straight line connecting that end point to the break point. This is your lapel. Fold the paper back flat. Trace a lapel onto the front side of your paper. Draw in your seam allowances. The last step is to mark the location of the buttons. I chose to use 3 buttons for my coat. The first button is placed at the waistline, which is also the break point for the lapel. The other 2 buttons are evenly distributed across the remaining height of the coat. The buttons that are placed on the outside front of the coat will be 1 inch from the center line. The buttons that are placed on the inside front of the coat will be 3 inches from the center line. The reason why the buttons on the outside front of the coat sit 1 inch from the center line is to ensure that the coat doesn't flap open when you wear it. To make it easier to cut out your fabric later, you can redraw or tape your tracing paper pattern onto thicker paper like my poster board. This is the final coat front and lapel pattern piece. You will need to cut 2 as a mirror image from your main coat fabric. Start with your back basic bodice block, non-stretch edition. I'm using clear acetate paper to show transformations to the basic blocks, but you should work directly on a copy of your basic blocks using a pencil and eraser. And when you do create that back block copy, you do not need to copy over the darts, as we won't need them for the coat. Modify the back coat length to match the front coat length, remembering to include the same extra 1 inch at the bottom. Extend the armhole by 1 inch outwards from the base. Then draw a vertical line from the new armhole base to the hemline. You may need to extend the width of the hemline if needed. You should not shorten the hemline width. Drew the sidelines of the front and back patterns to make sure that they are the same length. Then draw in your seam allowances. This is the final coat back pattern piece. You will need to cut 1 on the fold from your main coat fabric. I'm going to use my clear acetate paper again to more easily illustrate how to draft the coat collar, but you should use your tracing paper, a pencil, and eraser. Place your tracing paper over the neckline and shoulder of your coat front pattern piece. You can use tape or paper weights to hold it in place temporarily. Use your tape measure to determine the length of half of your back neckline on your coat back pattern piece. Draw a slightly curved line that has the same length as half of your back neckline using a hip curve ruler extending outwards from the front neckline. If you were to extend the neckline straight out, the difference between this line and the curved line should be approximately 0.25 inches. Next, draw a straight line perpendicular to the end of that curved line that is 5 inches in length. This is your collar fold line. Now trace the front neckline, stopping at the center front. Measure the length of the front neckline from the center front to the center line. On your tracing paper, draw a straight line starting at the center front and slightly angled away from the front neckline. That is the same length of what you just measured. The end of this line should not be greater than 0.75 inches away from the end of the front neckline. Use your curved ruler to connect the end of this line with the top of the collar fold line. This is your notch coat collar. This is the final coat collar pattern piece. You will need to cut 2 on the fold from your main coat fabric and 2 on the fold from your interfacing. We're going to use the coat front pattern that we just drafted as our foundation for the transformation into the front facing and front lining. Shorten the length of the hem by 2 inches. On your shoulder line, mark 2.5 inches inwards from the neckline. On your chest line, mark 4.5 inches inwards from the center line. On your waistline, mark 4.5 inches inwards from the center line. On your hemline, mark 4.5 inches inwards from the center line. Using your flexible ruler, connect the 4 markings that you just made. To the right of these markings, which I'm using red marker to shade in, represent your front facing. To the left of these markings, which I'm using blue marker to shade in, represent your front lining. You will need to draw these out on separate sheets of paper and add in the seam allowance along that dividing line you drew earlier. This is the final coat front pattern piece. You will need to cut 2 as a mirror image from your main coat fabric and 2 as a mirror image from your interfacing. And this is the final front lining pattern piece. You will need to cut 2 as a mirror image from your lining fabric. We're going to use the coat back pattern that we just drafted as our foundation for the transformation into the back facing and back lining. Shorten the length of the hem by 2 inches. On your shoulder line, mark 2.5 inches inwards from the neckline. This matches the shoulder marking that you made earlier on your coat front pattern. On your back center line, mark 3 inches below your neckline. Using your flexible ruler, connect the 2 markings, making sure to flatten the line out at the center line so that it can smoothly connect with its other half. Above these markings, which I'm using red marker to shade in, represent your back facing. Below these markings, which I'm using blue marker to shade in, represents your back lining. There is an additional modification you need to make to the lining to ensure there is enough room for movement. Extend the lining center line by 1 inch inwards. You will need to draw the back facing and lining out on separate sheets of paper and add in the seam allowance along that dividing curve you drew earlier. This is the final coat back facing pattern piece. You will need to cut one from your main coat fabric and cut one from your interfacing. And this is the final back lining pattern piece. You will need to cut one on the fold from your lining fabric. Start with your basic sleeve block, non-stretch edition. If you don't have one, watch my tutorial video, linked in the description. Extend the armhole by 1 inch outwards from the base on both the front and back sleeve bicep line. Extend the length of the sleeve past your wrist by 1 inch. This is the new hemline. This extra 1 inch will fold under to the inside of the sleeve, making sure that your lining doesn't show on the outside. Extend the wrist line by 1 inch. Use your rectangle ruler to connect the new armhole bases to the wrist line. Then, redraw your seam allowances. This is the final coat sleeve pattern piece. You will need to cut 2 as a mirror image from your main coat fabric. Next, we're going to use this coat sleeve pattern as our foundation for the transformation into the sleeve lining. The only difference with the sleeve lining is the length. It is 2 inches shorter than the coat sleeve pattern. This is the final sleeve lining pattern piece. You will need to cut 2 as a mirror image from your lining fabric. The outer pockets are a rectangle that are 6.25 inches wide by 7.25 inches tall with a 0.5 inch seam allowance. The pocket is big enough to fit your hand and a phone. You're welcome to modify the dimensions as you like. You will need to cut 4 as mirror images from your lining fabric. The inner welt pockets are a rectangle that are 6 inches wide by 8.25 inches tall with a 0.5 inch seam allowance and a fold line at the bottom. The pocket is big enough to fit your phone and a slim wallet. You're welcome to modify the dimensions as you like. The welt opening will be placed 0.5 inches below the top and be 5.25 inches long by 0.4375 inches or 1 centimeter wide. You will need to cut 2 on the fold from your lining fabric. The coat loop is a small rectangle that is 3 inches long by 0.5 inches wide with a 0.25 inch seam allowance. You will need to cut 1 from your lining fabric. These are all the final pattern pieces. You should have 12 in total. Coat front with lapel, coat back, coat collar, coat front facing, coat back facing, front lining, back lining, coat sleeve, lining sleeve, outer coat pocket, inner coat welt pocket, and coat loop. And that's it. We're done our designing. I highly recommend making a prototype to confirm the fit of your design. Now that you've drafted your short teddy coat pattern pieces, head on over to my other video where I show you how to sew it all together. I show you how to sew the coat from scratch with easy to follow directions. We start by sewing the lining together first, which includes the welt pockets. Then we move to sewing the coat, including the outer pockets, attaching the front and back pieces together, attaching the collar, attaching the facing, and lastly attaching the sleeves. I show you how to connect the coat and lining pieces together such that the seams are completely hidden on the inside. Lastly, I show you how to hand sew the snap closures. I hope you found this video helpful. See you in the next one. Happy drafting!